Picture the dusty streets of Deadwood, Dakota Territory, in the summer of 1876. The air is thick with the smell of sawdust, whiskey, and unwashed bodies as prospectors, gamblers, and fortune seekers crowd the muddy thoroughfares of America's most notorious boomtown. Through the chaos rides a figure that makes even hardened miners stop and stare. A woman in buckskins and boots, a rifle across her saddle, and a string of pack mules trailing behind her. Her name is Martha Jane Canary, but everyone calls her Calamity Jane. And she's about to become one of the most famous and infamous characters in the history of the American West. Now, some folks will tell you that Calamity Jane was nothing more than a drunk and a storyteller, spinning tall tales to anyone who'd buy her a drink. Others claim she was a fearless scout, a crack shot, and a woman who could outride and outfight any man on the frontier. The truth, as it often is, lies somewhere in between, but it's far more interesting than either version alone. This is the story of a woman who refused to be confined by society's expectations, who carved out her own place in a man's world, and who became a legend in her own lifetime. It's a tale of adventure, heartbreak, and the price of freedom in an era when women were expected to be seen and not heard. Before we follow Jane into the wild country of the Dakota Territory, let's set the stage for what the American frontier was like in the 1870s and 1880s. The great cattle drives were at their peak, railroads were pushing westward across the continent, and mining camps were sprouting up wherever someone struck gold or silver. It was a time of incredible opportunity and equally incredible danger, when fortunes could be made overnight and lost just as quickly. The frontier was also a place where traditional social rules were often suspended out of necessity. In the established cities of the East, a woman's role was clearly defined. She was expected to marry, bear children, and manage a household. But on the frontier, where survival often depended on everyone contributing whatever skills they possessed, these rigid roles began to break down. Into this world came Martha Jane Canary, born around 1852 in Princeton, Missouri, to a family that was already struggling to make ends meet. Her father, Robert Canary, was a farmer and gambler who seemed to have more luck with cards than with crops. Her mother, Charlotte, was a woman who had married young and found herself trapped in a life of poverty and constant movement as the family searched for better opportunities. Jane's childhood was marked by instability and hardship. The Canary family moved frequently, always chasing rumors of better land or easier money. They lived in Missouri, then Montana, then Wyoming, never staying in one place long enough for Jane to put down roots or receive a proper education. By the time she was in her teens, Jane had learned to shoot, ride, and take care of herself in ways that most girls of her generation never had to. The defining moment of Jane's youth came when she was around 14 years old. Her mother died, leaving Jane to care for her younger siblings, while her father continued his restless wandering. It was a responsibility that would have overwhelmed many adults, but Jane rose to the challenge with a determination that would characterize the rest of her life. When her father died a few years later, Jane found herself truly alone in the world. Her siblings were scattered, and she had no family to fall back on. Most young women in her situation would have sought the protection of marriage or the charity of relatives, but Jane chose a different path. She decided to make her own way in the world, using the skills she had learned during her hardscrabble childhood. The transformation from Martha Jane Canary to Calamity Jane began in the mining camps and cow towns of Wyoming and Montana. Jane discovered that she could make a living doing jobs that most women wouldn't or couldn't do, driving freight wagons, scouting for military expeditions, and working as a camp cook and general laborer in the rough settlements that dotted the frontier. It was dangerous work that required physical strength, mental toughness, and the ability to handle herself in situations where violence was always a possibility. Jane proved that she had all of these qualities in abundance. She could handle a team of oxen as well as any man, shoot straight enough to put meat on the table, and hold her own in the rough company of miners, soldiers, and cowboys. But it was her personality as much as her skills that made Jane famous. She was loud, profane, and utterly fearless in her interactions with men who were used to intimidating others. She could drink most men under the table, tell stories that would make a cavalry sergeant blush, and back up her words with her fists when necessary. In a world where women were expected to be quiet and submissive, Jane was anything but. The nickname Calamity Jane has several origin stories, and like many aspects of her life, the truth is probably a combination of all of them. Some say she got the name because trouble seemed to follow her wherever she went. Others claim it was because she would threaten to bring calamity down on anyone who crossed her. Still others believe it came from her habit of helping people in distress, turning their calamities into triumphs through her intervention. Whatever the origin, the name stuck, and it perfectly captured Jane's larger-than-life personality. She was a woman who seemed to attract drama and adventure wherever she went, and she had a talent for turning even ordinary events into epic stories that would be retold around campfires for years to come. Jane's reputation as a frontierswoman was built on a series of adventures that became the stuff of legend. There was the time she supposedly rode 90 miles through hostile Indian territory to warn a cavalry unit of an impending attack. The story goes that she rode through the night, changing horses at remote outposts, and arrived just in time to save the soldiers from ambush. Whether this particular story is true or not, it captures something essential about Jane's character and the role she played on the frontier. She was someone who could be counted on in a crisis, who would risk her own safety to help others, and who possessed the skills and courage necessary to survive in one of the most dangerous environments in America. Jane's association with some of the most famous figures of the American West helped cement her legendary status. She claimed to have scouted for General George Crook during his campaigns against the Sioux and Cheyenne. And while the details of her military service are disputed, there's no doubt that she spent time around army camps and knew many of the officers and soldiers who fought in the Indian Wars. Her relationship with Wild Bill Hickok, the famous gunfighter and lawman, became one of the most enduring aspects of her legend. Jane claimed that she and Hickok were lovers, and later that they had been secretly married. She told stories of their adventures together, their romantic relationship, and their shared commitment to bringing justice to the frontier. The truth about Jane's relationship with Hickok is probably less romantic than her stories suggested. They certainly knew each other. Both were fixtures in the saloons and gambling halls of Deadwood during the summer of 1876. But Hickok was involved with another woman at the time, and there's little evidence to support Jane's claims of a deep romantic relationship. What is certain is that Jane was in Deadwood on August 2, 1876, when Jack McCall shot and killed Wild Bill Hickok during a poker game at Nuttall and Mann's saloon. Jane's reaction to Hickok's death became part of the legend. She supposedly went on a drinking binge that lasted for days, swearing vengeance against McCall and anyone else who had wronged her beloved Bill. Whether or not Jane and Hickok were lovers, his death clearly affected her deeply. She continued to tell stories about their relationship for the rest of her life, and she was eventually buried next to him in Deadwood's Mount Moriah Cemetery, a final gesture that linked their names together for eternity. Deadwood in 1876 was one of the wildest places in America. A gold rush boomtown where fortunes were made and lost daily, and where violence was as common as morning coffee. The town had sprung up almost overnight after gold was discovered in the Black Hills, and it attracted every kind of character imaginable: prospectors, gamblers, prostitutes, merchants, and outlaws. Jane fit right into this chaotic environment. She worked various jobs around town, driving freight wagons, cooking for mining crews, and occasionally working in the saloons that lined Deadwood's main street. She was known for her generosity to those in need, often sharing her last dollar with someone who was down on their luck. But Jane was also known for her drinking, her profanity, and her tendency to get into fights when she felt she'd been wronged. She was arrested numerous times for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace, and she had a reputation for being able to clear a saloon with her temper when she was in the wrong mood. Despite her rough edges, Jane was also known for her compassion and her willingness to help others. During a smallpox epidemic that struck Deadwood in 1878, Jane volunteered to nurse the sick when most other people fled the town in terror. She worked tirelessly to care for victims of the disease, risking her own life to help people who had nowhere else to turn. This aspect of Jane's character, her willingness to help others despite her own problems, was one of the things that endeared her to the people of Deadwood and other frontier communities. She might be loud, drunk, and profane, but when people were in trouble, they could count on Calamity Jane to be there for them. Jane's adventures weren't limited to Deadwood. She traveled throughout the American West, working various jobs and accumulating stories that would become part of frontier folklore. She claimed to have worked as a Pony Express rider, though the timeline doesn't quite work out. She said she had been a scout for the Army during multiple Indian campaigns, and while some of these claims are exaggerated, she certainly spent time around military posts and knew many of the soldiers and officers involved in the Indian Wars. One of Jane's most famous exploits involved her rescue of a stagecoach that had been attacked by road agents near Deadwood. According to the story, Jane happened to be in the area when she heard gunshots and saw the coach under attack. She rode to the rescue, driving off the bandits with her rifle and helping the wounded passengers to safety. Like many Jane stories, the details of this incident are probably embellished, but it captures the essence of her character. Someone who would ride toward danger rather than away from it, and who had the skills and courage to make a difference in life or death situations. Jane's skill with weapons was legendary, though like many aspects of her life, the stories probably grew in the telling. She was certainly a competent shot, she had to be, given the life she led, but whether she was the crack shot of legend is debatable. What's not debatable is that she was comfortable with firearms and knew how to use them when necessary. Her preferred weapon was a rifle, which she carried across her saddle and used for hunting as well as protection. She was also known to carry a pistol, though she was less famous for her skill with handguns than some of her contemporaries. What made Jane dangerous wasn't necessarily her marksmanship, but her willingness to use her weapons when threatened. The later years of Jane's life were marked by increasing struggles with alcohol and the difficulty of maintaining her independence as she aged. The frontier was changing. Railroads were bringing civilization to remote areas. Law and order were being established, and there was less demand for the kind of rough-and-ready skills that had made Jane famous. Jane tried various ways to make a living as the old frontier disappeared. She appeared in Wild West shows, capitalizing on her fame to entertain audiences in the East who were fascinated by stories of frontier life. She worked as a cook and housekeeper when she could find such employment, and she continued to tell stories of her adventures to anyone who would listen. But Jane struggled with alcoholism throughout her later years, and her drinking often interfered with her ability to hold steady employment. She would go on binges that lasted for days or weeks, spending whatever money she had earned, and often ending up in jail for public drunkenness. Despite her problems, Jane retained the loyalty and affection of many people who had known her during her prime. They remembered her generosity, her courage, and her willingness to help others, and they tried to help her when they could. But Jane was a proud woman who had always insisted on taking care of herself, and she often refused help even when she desperately needed it. Jane's final years were spent largely in poverty, moving from town to town and relying on the kindness of old friends and admirers. She continued to tell stories of her adventures, and she remained a popular figure in the saloons and hotels where she stayed. But her health was failing, weakened by years of hard living and heavy drinking. Calamity Jane died on August 1, 1903, in Terry, South Dakota, just one day before the 27th anniversary of Wild Bill Hickok's death. She was found dead in her hotel room, apparently of natural causes, though her exact age was uncertain. She had given different birth years at different times, and there were no reliable records to settle the question. Her death marked the end of an era. Jane had been one of the last surviving characters from the wild days of the frontier, and her passing symbolized the closing of the American West. The newspapers that reported her death treated her as a relic of a bygone age, a reminder of a time when the frontier was truly wild and anything seemed possible. Jane was buried in Deadwood's Mount Moriah Cemetery, next to Wild Bill Hickok, as she had requested. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from throughout the region to pay their respects to a woman who had become a legend in her own lifetime. The legacy of Calamity Jane is complex and sometimes contradictory. She was undoubtedly a skilled frontierswoman who could handle herself in situations that would have defeated many men. She was generous to those in need and courageous in the face of danger. But she was also an alcoholic who often embellished her stories and whose later years were marked by poverty and decline. What makes Jane's story compelling is not just her individual adventures, but what she represented about the possibilities and limitations of frontier life. The American West offered opportunities for people to reinvent themselves and live outside traditional social constraints, but it also exacted a heavy price from those who chose that path. Jane's refusal to conform to society's expectations for women was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. It allowed her to live a life of adventure and independence that would have been impossible in more settled parts of the country. But it also left her isolated and vulnerable as she aged. Her story also highlights the role that storytelling played in creating the mythology of the American West. Jane was not just a participant in frontier life, she was one of its chroniclers, spinning tales that helped create the legends that still shape our understanding of the period. Whether her stories were literally true or not, they captured something essential about the spirit of the frontier and the people who lived there. The image of Calamity Jane riding across the Dakota prairie, her rifle across her saddle and her hair flying in the wind, captures something essential about the American frontier spirit. It speaks to our fascination with people who refuse to be limited by conventional expectations, who choose freedom over security, and who live life on their own terms regardless of the consequences. Jane's story reminds us that the American West was not just about cowboys and gunfighters, cattle drives and gold rushes. It was also about people like her, individuals who found in the frontier an opportunity to escape the constraints of conventional society and create their own identities. Some succeeded spectacularly, others failed tragically, but all of them contributed to the rich tapestry of American frontier life. Today, Calamity Jane is remembered as one of the most colorful characters in Western history. Her story has been told in countless books, movies, and television shows, though most of these portrayals focus more on the legend than the reality. The real Jane was more complex and more human than the mythical figure she became, but that makes her story even more compelling. In the end, Calamity Jane proved that the frontier belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it, regardless of gender or social background. Her legacy continues to inspire people who believe that individual freedom and self-determination are worth fighting for, even when the odds are stacked against you. The legend of Calamity Jane stands as a testament to the power of the human spirit to transcend limitations and create something extraordinary from the raw materials of courage, determination, and an unshakable commitment to living life on one's own terms.